Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I was thinking a little bit. We're in this period where you have a lot of, for lack of a better word, kind of nerd fandom type, uh, categories, properties, movies, and there's a lot of debate around them. And I was thinking to myself, are there any, quote unquote nerd fandom type properties where, yeah, generally everybody says they're doing well, meaning like yeah, there's a couple outliers there, but the general consensus is everybody is more or less happy. Meaning the mainstream audience that they're paying attention is happy. The quote unquote nerds who originally followed the property are happy. Like everybody's just pretty happy. I'll give you an example. It would be like if we'll just pick one out of a hat, like Aliens. Okay, like if Aliens was out and people are like, yeah, it's good. It's like a low, like light horror, a lot of sci-fi, but mostly sci-fi, a little bit of horror, some jump scare type stuff in there, and it's pretty good. This movie was better than the last one, but yeah, on the whole, they're pretty good. That was the kind of conversation that when I was a kid, we would have around things like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. I recently went back and watched the Nightmare on Elm Street stuff, and holy shit, are those films terrible? But they when I say terrible, I'm kind of doing it in air quotes. You can't see it. I mean, they're cheesy and the effects are cheesy, but it was also in the 80s when, like grabbing a woman and pulling her through a comically tiny window at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street #1 was, kind of a funny, kind of spooky into that film. And they're not scary now. I mean, there's almost nothing in there is scary. But generally speaking, I remember having a lot of conversations with friends around like, oh, did you like the third one? The third one it was cool if they brought back the character from the first one, and that was the lore. We learned a little bit more about the backstory and all that kind of stuff, and but yeah, I like the first one better than the second one. The second one, that kid was kind of a bitch, and then but it was a little bit more body horror gross in the second one, but the first one was all around more of a classic. And the third one was kind of a return to form, not exactly, amazing, but still had some. That was the kind of conversation that we had on properties. So fast forward to today, and it's like Star Trek it's very divisive. Star Wars very divisive. Indiana Jones divisive. Predator, where we have the new movie out. I have not seen it. So I don't have a heavy interest in it. I kind of wore off of Predator. I should say, I watched Predator as a kid on VHS. I remember watching that, and it was pretty cool. It was to me, it opened up a lot of imagination. It was like an action film, but it had some horror elements. It was a relatively, they're in a jungle. They're the army that is badass. They could take care of everything, but there's somebody stalking them, picking apart one by one, and there was some. It's just a cool film. A lot of cool stuff going on. And then I saw the second one. I wasn't as fond of the second one because I liked it better when it was in the jungle kind of environment. In the urban area was not as enjoyable to me, but still fun. And then at some point, I think there was Alien versus Predator, which was meh. And then I like at some point I jumped off the ship. I remember there was one where it was like the Predator planet, right? That the like criminals all went to or something, and I didn't that one I didn't really care for, and I don't think I saw. I think I dipped out of Prey. Is that the last one? Now we have Badlands. I haven't seen the last two, but anyway. But if you look at all these properties in general, and then the same thing would go, I guess, by the way, for comics, for Marvel Comics, for DC Comics, for the X-Men, for the Avengers, for the Justice League, the Flash. A lot of these properties are divisive now. So why now? Why in 2025 are all these things suddenly divisive? And a short answer, some of you may already be typing into the comments is, well, they all went woke, or they let in fake fans in there, and they made stories that were appealed to took the franchise in a different direction. And I think there's some truth to that, but I actually don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's a matter of a bunch of lesbians in Hollywood started writing Alien and gayed it up, and now it sucks. I mean, I don't buy that as actually what happened. I think to me, it's actually kind of, I would say, more complicated, maybe more simple. It's that if you think about how a lot of these properties began, right? Alien was a movie. it wasn't necessarily intended to be a franchise. It was intended to be a movie, and then they did a sequel, and then they made more money, and then they did more. But I was what caught me on this was Wes Craven. I found an interview with him, and he was talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. He was talking about for a long time, New Line was referred to as the studio that Freddy built because those movies really kind of carried that studio. But he said at no point did I ever think I never thought I was building a franchise in the way that Hollywood describes it. I was just making movies. I was just making stories, and then one did well, so I made another story, and then another story, and another story. And that's just kind of how it came about. And if you think about a lot of these properties, like Star Wars, I mean, Lucas was clearly making his kind of sprawling epic vision, but Lucas wasn't thinking that he was going to have 800 movies out there and a bunch of streaming shows and everything else. He was making a story and then another story and another story. And as much as I remember when I was a kid reading interviews where he said, I have an idea for 9 movies, that was clearly to some extent bullshit. I mean, maybe he had some ideas in his mind, but it wasn't, he didn't have all the, like, where I'm going to do The Mandalorian, then I'm going to come over here and do Ahsoka, and then I'm going to do, this, that. I mean, he didn't have all those thoughts. That came later. Just like Predator, like the idea of taking it from a cool movie into a franchise came later. And I think that the challenge is as it's less about, Hollywood going woke, and it's more about the idea of a franchise now, the idea of this is going to be something that we're going to build our studio off of. Or in the case of comics, it's not just that I'm making a Spider-Man comic. I've actually got to build a whole Spider-Verse, and I've got to have all these different versions. I think once you make that leap creatively from a cool story followed by another cool story into now I'm building a full-blown franchise, at that moment, you start making choices that go against the creativity of your original story. You start thinking about things like, how do I make this property for everyone? If you go back to Predator for a moment, Predator was meant to be an action film helmed by Schwarzenegger, where you had some light horror elements, but, it was really kind of gritty 80s action. That's what it was. At no point did the writer, the producer, the people involved say, hey, we're making this movie, but let's make sure we have a rom-com version here. And let's make sure that we can appeal to a, Latino audience. And let's make sure that we also consider, the tweens. What do we want to do for tweens? And what do we want to do for, people who are baby boomers? How do we get there? Like, at no point did they look at it and say, in order to make a franchise, we've got to actually have something that everyone can find themselves in. And once you head down that path, it waters down and dilutes whatever your original story idea was. The idea of just like, this is an action film with some horror in it, and we're going to have, it's going to look badass at times and everything else. It's going to appeal to this group. Look, I'm sure it did appeal to baby boomers and Latinos. And, I'm sure there's people who like rom-coms who still like Predator. You'll have that crossover, but you're not deliberately trying to grow the audience in the way that a franchise grows the audience. You're just trying to tell a good story. And so I think what's happened, if I can give this theory, is you have all these nerd franchises, geek franchises. I should have been using geek, not nerd all this time, but you have these geek franchises, and or rather you have geek stories that have become geek franchises. And in the world of geek franchises, they start compromising the story by trying to appeal to to everyone in some form or fashion. And the reality is, and I've said this before in videos, you should make it available to everyone, not necessarily appeal to everyone. Those are two different things. There is, it is a mistake to try and make something for everyone. It is a good idea to make something that everyone can enjoy, not that everyone must enjoy or should enjoy or catered to everyone. Those are different things. If you walk in the theater, you happen to have a good time with Predator, you should be willing, it should be perfectly available for you to do that. If it fits what you're looking for, it's there for you. But it's not trying to go out and grab all these things, inorganically. I think that is the problem. So that's why so many of these fandoms are divisive today, because they've gone away from the original story, and instead they're, trying to kind of, in a kind of a mushy way, appeal to everything and everyone. And as a result, nobody is particularly happy. The thing about, we had these very divisive fandoms, things like the Marvel universe, the DC universe. We're taking it back to comics, but we can stick with Predator. The challenge with that is that you get something that some people will like, but the people who are really behind the current version of a property really, you often do not like the original versions. You don't often find in fandoms people who just liked all the pieces of it, and sometimes that's a little bit by design. What the studios are trying to do is say, we'll slap the Star Trek logo on it, and it will just blanket it to as wide an audience as possible, and somebody will like it, and then hopefully we'll make money. But that is a different approach than the original creators who say, we're going to make a cool sci-fi thing. It's going to appeal to a demographic, a part of the audience, and that's enough. That's good. You see, there's a difference there. And I think, to me, that explains a bit better why things are so divisive now, because they've made themselves so generic that it's everyone can find themselves in it and nobody can find themselves in it. It's just it's turned in on itself. I don't know if this is making a lot of sense, but it made a lot of sense in my head before I started talking. I guess I just think it's too convenient to go, oh, it's leftist Hollywood politics has affected everything. Because if you actually watch some of these movies or some of these shows, it doesn't necessarily feel like leftist politics, or you really have to squint your eyes and make it fit in that way. But that also doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's this isn't super woke doesn't mean it's naturally good. There's a lot of things that are not good, and perfectly perfectly not political in any way. It's just not good. And so I think the barrier here is when you have something that appeals to a certain audience and you say that I'm not comfortable with that audience anymore, I want more, and you try and just widen the aperture so wide that it really appeals to no one. That, to me, is where a lot of things have gone. Anyway, crazy theory for a crazy afternoon. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, or, this whatever. But Perch, it is the leftist. Okay, fine. Whatever. Thanks for listening.